gentlemen, and welcome back to Dinozor Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. Spoiler season strikes back as we go into the second week of reveals for Secrets of Power, and there is just over a month left now for the set to release, and the hype and the excitement is just getting better and better. And we got a very cool new leaders this set, some new mechanics, and honestly some of the best art we have ever seen in Star Wars Unlimited. So let's go ahead and check that out here, of course starting with the leaders. So the first one is going to be Luthen Rail, Aggression, Heroism, that says when a friendly unit is defeated while attacking, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, deal 1 damage to a unit or base. We have seen this flavor of leader ability quite a few times in the game so far, but usually you're limited to either hitting a unit or a base. It's very rare for you to be able to choose which one to do. So that does give this leader the flexibility of playing a bit more of an aggressive style, training in your units into sentinels perhaps, or having some overwhelm units to, you know, not only get rid of their units, deal them damage, but you get an extra bit of damage as well. Alternatively, in a mid-range deck, you could be trading your units and using that extra damage to finish off something else that's already injured. Or honestly, potentially you can treat this as some of your units have an extra 1 power. With a 2 power unit, you can then attack into a 3/3, for example, and after it's defeated, use a leader ability to finish it off. Honestly, a very fantastic, adaptable leader ability. We're going to see a lot of Luthen. Potentially a great substitute for Sabine when she gets rotated out, but on his own stands quite well as well. And he does flip on 5 as a 2/7, a pretty decent stat line. We've seen a lot of the official leaders have this in Piet, Tarkin, Krennic, and while it's not the 3/7 that everybody wants, it's still good enough. And of course it's the same ability, except this time it deals 2 damage. An interesting note about this is that it works extremely well with cards that sacrifice themselves, a great example being Heroic Sacrifice, that says, you know, draw a card, attack with a unit with an extra 2 power, and then at the end of the combat it dies, right? So if you do that on a K2SO, you're not only hitting for 6 with Overwhelm, K2SO will die, deal 3 damage to the opponent's base, and then Luthen will trigger dealing another 2. You just did 11 damage in a single action. Most of the time that will just end the game right there. Great leader, definitely keep an eye on it. Next up, we have Colonel Yularen here, green command villainy that says action, attack with a unit, then you may attack with another unit that costs less than it. My god, Leia has aged well. What a man, right? I mean, more realistically, this is essentially the villainy aspect Leia, with the condition that you need to be attacking with something that costs less than it. So if you're playing a normal curve of a 2 cost on turn 1 followed by a 3, you still can't use the leader ability until turn 3 when both of those units survive. It is fairly limited in that aspect. However, this works extremely well with units that are able to generate tokens, and we're seeing quite a bit of that this set with all the spy tokens running around. Or, I mean, if you want to use some of the older cards with the TIE Fighters, X-Wings that are being spawned, because the token in general has 0 cost. So if you have a card that, let's say on turn 1, summons a TIE Fighter, well, on turn 2 you can immediately use Yularen already to attack with both. So that makes Yularen a very interesting and fast aggro leader, assuming that the token synergy in the set is good enough. And to be fair, we are seeing quite a bit of spy generation so far. And of course he flips on 5 as a 4/6, very similar to Leia once again. When this unit completes an attack and survives, you may attack with another unit that costs 4 or less. Much better than the leader side. A great ability, letting you get 2 actions in 1. Action compression has always been king in this game, and this is no different. I think this is going to be a very aggressive and very strong leader. It's definitely something worth keeping an eye on. Following that up though, of course, we couldn't get 3 amazing leaders, so we get C-3PO instead. Action, pay 1, exhaust. If you control an exhausted unit, exhaust the unit. Just reading this is exhausting. To be honest, it's a very niche ability. For you to have an exhausted unit, normally it means you just played something or you attacked with something, and at that point there's a very good chance that your opponent is going to see what's about to happen, so they'll attack with the unit that you would want to exhaust anyways. Of course, with the caveat that if there are some units in this set that work similarly to Rampart that will not unexhaust themselves, then in that situation C-3PO could have some interesting uses. But as it is, from what we know so far, this is a very mediocre effect. And then he flips on 4, which while early, the stat line does not work well. He's a 1/6. Of course, Rebel and Droid are great traits. But on attack, you may control, if you control another exhausted unit, you may exhaust the unit. It's pretty much the same condition. It works okay if you have something like a Fleet Lieutenant that will come in from hand. It'll be exhausted, right? That'll let C-3PO attack. And that way, in a single action, you get to not only attack and exhaust something. So there's some good things about this. And on top of that, it is a droid. So with Babu Frik, this does hit for 6. That is not something you can completely ignore, I suppose. But I believe his ability is just a bit too slow for aggro. And then if you consider this in a more of a mid-range and control shell, first of all, Cunning is not great for control. And on top of that, if you're playing control, why would you want such a weak statted leader? You want something that is able to fight for the board. So now jumping into the units here, starting with Vigilance. First one is going to be Populist Advisor. 1 cost, blue-white, a 1/4 New Republic official. When an enemy unit deals combat damage to your base, this unit gains Sentinel. I mean, in theory, this sounds like a great tool to fight off aggro, but the problem is that most of the time a good player will play around this very easily, either attacking with their big unit first so that the Sentinel doesn't matter as much, or attacking with their small unit first so that then their big unit is able to kill this off when it becomes a Sentinel. Alternate, I mean, even if not, that 1/4 is not the best stat line. It's very easy for someone to just walk over this. Yeah, there's some niche situations where you can buff this up with Ray, make it a bit of a threat. But I think it's just a bit too slow to be played seriously, at least in a premium setting. Next up, we have Jade Squadron Patrol. 6 cost, 6/6, Sentinel. Purely amazing limited card. Doesn't stand out enough for premium. So draft chaff, I guess, so to speak. A pretty decent card as is. The stat line is what you want in a big Sentinel like this. So you'll want this in limited. Moving into the villainy, though, we have Emergency Powers. A law, 1 cost, blue-black. Choose a non-leader unit and pay any number of resources. For each resource paid this way, give an experience token to the chosen unit. What a card. Now, this is going to be a very highly sought-after card, both in limited and in premium. Now, first of all, in limited, experience is already amazing. You don't have the best of units, so having one that's good enough and then buffing it up is very good, especially if you set up a Sentinel that's way too big for your opponent to deal with. But on top of that, what makes this really cool is that it gives a sort of reach to Vigilance villainy that normally you don't have access to. A great example would be on your leader flip turn. Let's say you flip your leader and your opponent gets rid of it using all of their resources through Rival's Fall or Force Lightning or something like that. Well, you now have all of your resources open. You get to use Emergency Power and give a ton of experience to whatever other unit you already had in play, and then you get to hit their base. Alternatively, if you're not playing the aggressor in the matchup, you can save it for something like a Chirrut that you have in play and buff that up to an absurd amount. So if you play Chirrut on turn 3 and follow up with this on turn 4, that Chirrut's getting an insane amount of stats. We're talking about +4/+4. So that's a 7/9 Sentinel that, if you have the Force, is pretty much unbreakable. That would win you the game immediately against any aggro decks. Next up, we have Lobot, 2 cost, 0/4, Sentinel Grit. Cute card. The Sentinel is somewhat relevant, but again, this is way too slow for premium. Some decks might want to use this, like in Akira. This is like a Build-A-Bear for a Village Protector, but I think it's just going to take too many actions for it to become relevant. In limited, it'll be a nice little wall that your opponent needs to get through, and if they don't have enough big units to deal with this, so if your opponent's playing a lot of Spy Generation, for example, this is a great answer to it. Next up, we have Bardotten Velociraptor. I don't know, I'm not going to pronounce that. 4 cost, 3/4 Vigilance. When played, you may disclose blue. If you do, draw a card. So we already have the X-Wing in Heroism Vigilance that does pretty much the same thing, but having to take 2 damage to itself. And that is seeing a fair bit of play. I think with that extra 1 cost is just enough to make this not viable in premium. But card draw is already something that you don't have access to a lot in general in the game. So in limited, this will be a fantastic card. And I would not be too surprised if this finds its way into some premium decks just to have more card draw. Next up, we have Nala Se, 5 cost Vigilance, 4/7. Kaminoan, a trait we have had no support for so far. On attack, you may disclose double blue. If you do, heal up to 4 damage from among other units. To note here that this is one of the very few healing effects that lets you spread out the healing however you want. You don't need to put all of it into a single unit. So if you have a lot of injured units, you can bring them all back up. But how often does that actually happen in Star Wars Unlimited? It's very rare. On top of that, we have seen this exact same stat line on another card in Rey. Of course, that was limited to Heroism, but it was pretty much the same effect, except it only healed 2 and gave a shield, which arguably is worth a lot more than just 2 more healing. and that Ray did not see any serious competitive play. So I don't think it would be any different for Nala, who's arguably even worse than Ray. Having to disclose 2 blue cards is somewhat of a consideration to make. Even if you are playing a double blue deck, you are revealing your hand. Following that up with knowledge and defense, first of all, a big thank you here to the artist. Like, what is this, right? But knowledge and defense, 3 cost vigilance, give a unit -2/-2 for this phase, draw a card. Fantastic card. We have make an opening, we have perilous position. They have both seen quite a bit of play, and this is going to be no different. One of the main issues when you're playing a removal based control deck is that you run out of cards. So if you have any removal that can replace itself like this, if your opponent plays a Lurking Tie Phantom and you answer with this, you not only did you get rid of a threat, but now you drew a card and you are up in cards and you're winning the attrition game. Next up, moving into command here, we have Figure of Unity, an upgrade that is a legendary. That's something we have seen before, of course, but it is not common. So this is 3 cost command heroism, attached to a unique unit, and the attached unit gains, while this unit is ready, each other friendly unit gains Overwhelm, Raid 1, Restore 1, and it gives that unit itself +2/+2. In theory, this is a great effect. Anthems are always very strong. We see that very clearly in something like Victor Leader. But the thing is that in this game, most decks do not go wide enough. Other than Vader Yellow, we have seen very few decks that play more than 2 or 3 units at a time. And at that point, having something that buffs all of them is not that interesting. That said, if there is a deck, once again, that comes up like generating a ton of tokens, whether that's spy tokens or some other form of X-Wings or what have you, then this could be extremely interesting. There are also some niche scenarios where you can make this pretty busted. For example, if you're playing a Spectre deck and you have the Ghost that's in your space and you put this on your leader, for example, that Ghost will get that Raid 1 and that Restore 1, which will then propagate to all of your other units. So anything other than your leader and that Ghost will become Raid 2, Restore 2, which at that point becomes very interesting. But so far, once again, we don't have any Spectre decks that go that wide. Following that up with Gonk Power Droid, 2 cost 1/3. The stats alone, even if without reading the ability, the stats are going to make it so this card doesn't see any serious play. But on attack, the next unit you play this phase costs 1 less. This is like a miniature General's Blade. I think the 1/3 stat line is going to make it so no one will seriously consider this in premium. But in limited, it's pretty good. It's sort of like a half of a General's Blade. And the best part about this is that it is on attack. So if you attack with it, even if your opponent does get rid of it, you still get the discount. So if you play this on turn 1, on turn 2, you get to play a 4 cost. Is that worth it? Remains to be seen, because at the moment, 4 costs aren't too key in most of the decks. Usually ramp decks such as green rather skip the turn 4 and jump straight into the 5 cost. So I mean, with the right set of cards, maybe, but overall, I think this is not a good card. Following that up with Daro Commando, 3 cost, 3/4, Imperial Clone Trooper, all 3 extremely relevant traits, and Overwhelm. I think this is just an extremely solid card. This will be an auto include in almost every single limited deck. And in premium, in some decks, this might be a good consideration. 3/4 is almost the perfect stat line that you want for a 3 cost, and those traits are going to make it so some decks, for example, if you're making a Trooper deck, you will want this for sure. Next up, we have Convene the Senate. So an event here that's just command. Search the top 8 cards of your deck for up to 2 official units, reveal them, and draw them. Then create a spy token. So I mean, this is essentially Prepare for Takeoff, but for officials, and Prepare for Takeoff costs 2. Even at that, it doesn't see too much play. So is paying an extra 1 for a spy token worth it? That's debatable. We've seen that currently the average value of a 1 cost seems to be about 2/2 in stats. So a spy token being a 0/2 is worth a bit less than 1. So Prepare for Takeoff that saw barely any play, plus an extra cost for that spy token. I think this card is just slightly too overcosted for anything serious. But if the game does slow down considerably, for example, after the rotation, this is a very decent bit of card draw. Moving into aggression here, we have Imperial Occupier. 2 cost, aggression, villainy, 2/2, Imperial Trooper, once again, great traits, that says when defeated, create a spy token. Now, this is an amazing card. any card that when defeated creates a token of some kind is gonna have to have some serious consideration. For example, in Thrawn, this is a turn 1 play that if defeated summons 2 tokens. But even outside of Thrawn, anything that's sticky enough that your opponent just doesn't want to kill is good, because when they don't want to kill it, it's going to stay in play, it's going to keep doing damage. So yeah, it's only a 2/2, but if this stays alive for 3 turns and deals 6 damage to your opponent, it's essentially a 6/2. And I think that is something that people really overlook. This card is going to be fantastic, as I mentioned, especially in Thrawn. If you play it with Arinda Price from last week's reveals, due to how the timing and the nesting works, you get to trigger Thrawn on Arinda, kill this, create the spy token, and then trigger Arinda a second time. So that's 8 damage that you just dealt to the enemy base that they cannot interact with whatsoever. A fantastic card. Expect to see this a lot. Following that up, we have 5-cost Mirage Sintel, Aggression Villainy, 3/7 Separatist Official. Now, before we even read what the rest of the card does, this is a 5-cost Separatist, so you always need to consider that this can be abused by Dooku. So it says, while a friendly unit is attacking a damaged unit, that attacker gains Overwhelm, and when played, you may deal 3 damage to an undamaged unit. Now, having to do it to an undamaged unit specifically is quite the downside, especially when not all, but most of the new turn 1 plays are having 4 health. This is not going to kill them. That said, it does leave them injured, so that the first effect will trigger, give it Overwhelm. So being able to do this with Dooku on turn 2, if you exploit out a droid or something, it's going to be very big. On turn 2, having a 3/7 that is also dealing damage, potentially killing or injuring one of your opponent's units. This card is going to be fantastic in that deck. But outside of it, it might be just a little bit too slow or too niche. But once again, a fantastic limited card. Following that up with Rebellious Functionary, as we mentioned, a 1-cost is generally worth 2/2, and this is a Heroism Aggression 1-cost 2/2 with Hidden. So it's perfect stats with an upside. This will definitely be used in any form of sealed or draft, and we have seen quite a few decks nowadays running a ton of 1-drops to kind of flood the board, go a little wide, because playing more than a single card a turn is the perfect answer to playing against control. If you're playing versus blue-green or double blue, most of their cards are going to trade 1 for 1. So if on turn 1 you get to play 2 1-drops, you're going past them, and the more 1-cost 2/2s that are available, the more this becomes prevalent. So I think this card is going to be pretty good. You'll expect to see it a fair bit. Following up, we have Reckless Rebel, 1-cost 2/1 Saboteur. Everything I just said for the last card still applies here. A little bit weaker, it is a 2/1, but Saboteur is a very interesting keyword. Sure, you're ignoring Sentinels, but more than that, a card like this, if it's in your deck, pretty much negates Village Protector, one of the absolute best Sentinels in the game. So even if this is not in your main deck, you could put this in your side deck, and any Heroism blue deck starts crying, right? And pretty decent 1-drop. Next up, we have Luthen's Hallcraft, 5-cost, Aggression Heroism, 5/3, Rebel Vehicle Transport, great traits, which says, when defeated, you may choose an opponent and disclose double red, white. If you do, that opponent discards 2 cards from their hand. Why, FFG? Why are you printing Pillage on legs? If a lot of people are playing Pillage right now, and would you pay an extra 1 to have a 5/3 come into play with that Pillage? Of course you would. That is an absurd amount of stats for an extra 1. The disclose is costly, I suppose, but if you're playing a deck that is playing red-white, most of the time you will have access to that. And in a set where one of the main mechanics is disclosing, having to have cards in your hand, when your opponent is able to trigger this just a single time, you can no longer disclose. Normally on your turn, you will have 4 cards in your hand if there has been no discard, and if you've only played a single card a turn. So immediately being pillaged down to 2 means that whenever you play a card, that last card in your hand needs to be exactly what you need to disclose. So honestly, the more discard effects that they print, the less good disclose gets, and we just banned Force Throw partially because of that. I'm really sad that this still exists, but it is a very strong card. And hey, if I'm playing red-white, I'm probably playing this. Moving on, we have Crosshair, 2-cost Aggression, 2/3 Imperial Clone Trooper. On attack, you may deal 1 damage to another friendly unit. If you do, deal 2 damage to the defending player's base. Wow, I'm in love. What a card. 10 out of 10 art, and the effect itself is fantastic here. If this was a 2/4, if it had one more health, I would have to leave my wife for it. It's such a great card. This thing played on turn 1 sets up such a big threat for turn 2. If you play this on turn 1 and then on turn 2 you play something like a Snowtrooper Lieutenant, to attack with this, you're dealing 6 damage to the enemy base. That extra 1 damage, you can put it on the Lieutenant. Who cares? That thing has already done what it has to do. And on top of that, you still have 1 resource open to use your leader ability potentially. So if you're playing Tarkin or Deidre or anything of the sort, you get to get maximum value out of it. And dealing that much damage on turn 2 really sets the pace, because at that point, it is very unlikely for your opponent to be able to race you. And so they immediately switch to the defensive. And now they need to start clearing your stuff. And you can keep that onslaught going. And then if they don't immediately deal with this, next turn you can just repeat that again, deal a massive amount of damage. Just a great card overall. It is hindered a little bit by its 2/3 stat line, but I think that's fair. As a 2/4, this would potentially be just completely broken. Next up, we have AAT Incinerator, 5 cost, 3/6, Imperial Tank Vehicle. When played, deal 1 damage to each of up to 4 other ground units. If no friendly units were damaged, deal 2 damage to your base. I mean, this is IG 2000 on the ground. However, this only hits ground units. And on top of that, if you don't have another unit when you play this, you're dealing 2 damage to your own base. I just don't think this is good enough. It has too many limitations for such a minimal payoff here. 1 more cost than IG for 2 extra health and a huge amount of downsides. I expect to see absolutely 0 play from this outside of limited. Next up, we have Punishing One. Speaking of overcosted cards, Aggression, 3/5 for 5. When played on attack, you may deal 1 damage to a unit, and then this unit gains raid 1 for each damaged enemy unit. So in a perfect world where you play this, injure a unit, and then on the next turn you attack, injure another unit, this is a 5 cost 5/5. If that's what you want, there are plenty of other cards that can do it without the extra conditions and having to meet all that jazz. Of course, there is the upside that potentially that when played the non-attack is just going to kill some stuff, in which case you're hitting less hard, but you are controlling the board. It's a cute card, it's an interesting card, but I just don't think it's there. As a 4 cost, potentially this would have been very interesting, but at 5, I think it's just a little too expensive to see any serious play. Moving on, we have Let's Call It War, an event tactic, very relevant for Stila Guerrera. Deal 3 damage to a unit, then if you have the initiative, you may deal 2 damage to another unit in the same arena. This is super grenade strike, so to speak, right? If you do have the initiative, you're dealing 5 damage for 3, which is just a little bit better than Open Fire. Open Fire dealing 4 for 3. Of course, you do need the initiative here. So if you do start the game, play something on turn 1 and then immediately claim, you get to do this. Or if you're playing more of a control shell, for example, if you're playing Kira Red, you get to completely bypass turn 1. Most of the time, some of those control decks just claim initiative on turn 1 anyways because they want to power up the dark side. And then when your opponent plays 2 cards, you cry. And then if you have Let's Call It War, you can completely negate that. Dealing 5 damage on turn 2 for a single card will sometimes break your opponent's momentum so much that they will not be able to win the game. Moving into Cunning here, we have Rebel Propagandist, 3 cost, Cunning Heroism, 2/4, Rebel Official, great traits. When played, when defeated, give another friendly unit +1/+0 and Saboteur for this phase. I think its stats are just a little underwhelming. The new standard for 2 costs is 2/4, so a 3. So is it worth paying an extra resource just for that when played, when defeated effect? Unlikely. Saboteur is good, +1 attack is good, but I think this is just a little bit too slow to see any play. If it let you attack with the unit immediately, it would be a strong consideration. Honestly, at that point, it might be a bit too good, but I think this is just not good enough, barely even good enough for limited. Next up, we have A-Wing, just Cunning, 1 cost, 1/2 with raid 1. This is essentially a 1 cost 2/2 in space, where space units in general have just a little bit less stats than ground. So this is a fair compromise to having a 1 cost 2/2 in space. Look, Vader Yellow is already dominating with a ton of 1-drops, and this is better than half of them that they already play. So this will see play in that deck, an auto include. But outside of that, it's hard to see much argument for this. Maybe if you're playing Ray Red and you want to buff it up. But I think this is still going to see a fair bit of play because of Vader. We have Unruly Astromech here for 3 Cunning 3/2 droid with Hidden, and when defeated, exhaust an enemy unit. So first things first, anytime there's a when defeated card, you always have to consider it with Thrawn in mind. And this is a great example because Thrawn Yellow, while it hasn't been too great so far, it does have one of the best when defeated units in Legacy Run. It just doesn't have anything else to be worth playing Cunning. So the more when defeated Cunning cards we get, the better that deck gets. First, let's examine this outside of Thrawn. We saw Lothcat have a fair bit of use in Palpatine, for example. That is a 2/1 that says exhaust the unit, but that is when played and when defeated. So this is for an extra cost, you're getting +1/+1 in the hidden instead of when played. I think that's a fair trade-off. I think this is a decent card. This will be an absolute dominant card in limited, but very niche in premium. If we get another big, good when defeated Cunning card, then this will be an auto include in Thrawn. It'll be a great way to stall the game out just enough for you to get your big boys out. Next up, we have Charged with Espionage. You may disclose double yellow, and if you do, look at an opponent's hand and discard a unit from it. I mean, this is Spark of Rebellion that is not limited to heroism. Of course, it is only a unit, and that is a downside that you cannot ignore. Please ignore the description in the middle that says double red. That's a problem. Because most of the time when you're using Spark of Rebellion, you want to get rid of that key card that hurts you really bad, and a lot of the times that's something like Overwhelming Barrage or Pillage or Force Throw. Rest in peace. So with Charge with Espionage, you can't do that. You can only get rid of a unit. But if you get rid of their big unit, like their Luke Skywalker or their Darth Vader, it's definitely worth it. Disclosing 2 yellow cards is something that could be limiting, but not too much. I think this is a great card. It's going to be a decent substitute when Spark of Rebellion rotates out. Next up, we have Fel Sartha for 5, Cunning, 4/6, rate 2. This is essentially a 5-cost 6/6, and then each exhausted enemy unit gets -2/-0 while defending. Very good board controlling effect, and very good stats for that specifically. This will be an absolute threat bomb in sealed and drafts. You want to get as many of these as possible. But for limited, I think there's just way better for that cost. It's a bit too slow. It's unlikely for you to be able to ambush this out, so not much play. Moving into just villainy here, we have FN Trooper Corps, 5 cost, 4/5, first order trooper. When played, give an experience token to another friendly unit and plot. That plot keyword here turns this card from a mediocre, unusable common to being one of the strongest 5 costs we have ever seen in the game. We always mention the speed being an important aspect to it, and plot helps that considerably. Any leader that is 5 cost and wants more stats will absolutely be playing this. Imagine playing this card in something like Mother Talzin, who's already a 3/7. You flip Mother and you flip this at the same time from your resources. Mother Talzin becomes 4/8. On attack, you give your opponent's unit -1/-1. That's essentially a 5/9 on your leader turn, and that's insane, right? I mean, this, if you consider the experience token in its own stats, this is a 5-cost 5/6, which is somewhat decent. For 5 costs, you generally expect about 6/6 worth in stats for it to be good. And that experience token going to something else is potentially worth more than that 1 extra power. On top of that, it is first order, so we cannot ignore the elephant in the room, which is Captain Phasma. Captain Phasma flipping on 5 will plot this out. It'll become a 5/7, and this is a first order, which will immediately enable Phasma to deal that extra 2 damage as well. Just a fantastic card. I expect to see this in a lot of decks. Moving on, we have Supreme Council 8 for 1, Villainy, 2/2. We went over the importance of having 1-cost 2/2s. No special effect because it is just Villainy, but it is first order. It is an official. It has all the traits you want it to have. Great card. I do expect to see some play from this. And so we have High Command Counselor, 2-cost heroism, 1/4. While you control another official unit, this unit gains rate 2. Under certain conditions, this is going to be a 2-cost 3/4, which in theory is very, very good. But the condition itself being having another official means that if you play this on turn 1, turn 2, you need to play that official first. And your opponent now has the time to attack into this, only taking 1 damage back. So it's like a weaker Aura Sing, unfortunately. I think just because of that, this is going to be limited to limited. And last and potentially least, we have Ando Commission here. No aspects, 4 cost, 4/3 Sentinel. We have had 4/3 Sentinels in the past. They've been decent, but they usually cost less than 4. So, I mean, this is just a pack filler. You'll use this in limited just because you don't have any other options. It is aspectless, so everybody will be able to use this. Whatever, decent card. That's about it. And with that, guys, we've come to an end to this week's reveals. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would love to hear what you guys think. What was the best card that you saw today? Is there something you think I'm completely wrong about? Please leave me a comment, a like, a subscribe. It helps out very much. And if you liked it, I will see you guys next time.